Fauci says 2 masks are better than 1. To kind of break this story down for us about double masking.
Essentially, he says it's providing a barrier to intercept those little droplets of saliva that carry the viruses. By double masking, you essentially provide a bit more of a denser obstacle, as he says. It's an obstacle course, he actually calls it. It has been people's personal preference. And again, what has really pushed this entire conversation is seeing public officials actually wearing 2 masks in public.
Tonight, vaccine anxiety, confusion and concern voiced by several governors and top health officials.
The current supply crunch is the one that I'm most worried about.
The scale of that supply crunch is a big unknown for the new director of the CDC.
I can't tell you how much vaccine we have, and if I can't tell it to you, then I can't tell it to the governors, and I can't tell it to the state health officials.
While in New York, Senate leader Chuck Schumer said he pressed the White House to take urgent action.
The state needs to know, the city needs to know what to expect in terms of supplies so they can set up the distribution system, and they need to get more vaccines.
President Biden released a nearly 200-page national strategy for COVID that includes setting up vaccination centers.
The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, to stand up the first federally supported community vaccination centers with the goal of 100 centers in the next month.
Further, the number of patients that are requiring full support and eventually being intubated is 3-4 times what we were seeing before. This is much worse.
Just 40 minutes away in Linwood, California, the situation is strikingly similar. Dr. James Simmons, a nurse practitioner on the front lines at St. Francis Hospital, says his COVID-19 patients are getting sicker and staying longer, too.
You both write about how this pandemic, in your view, will be as defining as World War II. What are the key steps to take right now?
Well, we have to do 2 things at once. We have to bring this epidemic to an end, primarily by getting the vaccine out in large numbers to the entire world. And we have to make sure that we're ready because there will be another pandemic. And
the Chinese, over the last week or 2, have identified a virus in the environment. It has not yet shown to be infecting humans, but it is exhibiting what we call reassortment capabilities. In other words, when you get a brand new virus that turns out to be a pandemic virus, it's either due to mutations and or the reassortment or exchanges of genes.
Have discovered a new strain of the flu that has the potential to become a pandemic. The flu strain is carried by pigs but can infect humans. Researchers say it has all the hallmarks of being highly adapted to infect humans, meaning it can mutate and spread easily from person to person.
And there was some evidence already showing that some farm workers already have the antibody. That means they were already being infected. So especially, as you also mentioned, during this COVID-19 pandemic, the G4 virus also have very similar symptoms as flu, as a coronavirus. So it's quite likely to be mixed with the other kind of disease to crash the healthcare system.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this. Fauci also said the G4 virus is showing reassortment capabilities. What does he mean by that?
So that means that the mutation may goes on for quite quickly and may go into unknown directions, swine flu strain. So that's why we need a close monitoring this. And I think it's already happening in 2009, very similar G4 variants. So it's a combination of a common flu and G4 variants. And importantly, human beings have no immunity against this virus.
We've sequenced the virus and determined its origin, and we've modeled the way it enters the cells of the lung and the brain. And the virus contains both bat and pig sequences. And in the bottom right, you can see the dark green is pig and the light green is bat. And here you can see the crossover event, bat, and pig, bat. And here is a model of the virus and how it attaches to its host. The blue is virus, and the gold is human, and the red is the viral attachment protein, and the green is its receptor in the human cells. And these receptors are found in the cells of both the respiratory tract and the central nervous system. And
I am fuck with anyone, I stay up in my home. I can do it by myself, I'll do it on my own. Paparazzi's flashing, I'm nowhere near where they're aiming. I don't care about the cloud, it's paper that I'm chasing. I don't fuck with anyone, I stay up in my home. I can do it by myself, I'll do it on my own. Paparazzi's flashing, I'm nowhere near where they're aiming. I don't care about the cloud, it's paper that I'm chasing. All these other people causing drama, entertainment. I'm just looking for the money, worry about the payment. They say I'm paper chasing, I think that's an understatement. They say I'm paper chasing, I think that's an understatement. I won't stop till I got bags, stacking up all of these bands. Making this money's the plan, so much won't fit in my pants. Buying my mama a house, taking the family out. Go somewhere nice with a view, might not come back or up you. No limits aiming for moons, I want a house with 6 rooms. Riding the CDC fumes, hoping to get there real soon. Looking to better myself, I do not want to stack out. Deal with the cards I've been dealt, still I be naming for wealth. All these other people causing drama, entertainment. I'm just looking for the money, worry about the payment. They say I'm paper chasing, I think that's an understatement. They say I'm paper chasing, I think that's an understatement. I don't fuck with anyone, I stay up in my home. I can do it by myself, I'll do it on my own. Paparazzi's flashing, I'm nowhere near where they're aiming. I don't care about the cloud, it's paper that I'm chasing. I don't fuck with anyone, I stay up in my home. I can do it by myself, I'll do it on my own. Paparazzi's flashing.
South Carolina's governor is telling residents not to panic after 2 cases of the highly contagious COVID strain, first identified in South Africa, were detected in the state. South Carolina now ranked 2nd in the nation for new COVID cases per capita.
Tonight, the first known cases of that highly infectious COVID variant from South Africa now confirmed in the U.S. 2 people from South Carolina with no travel history or connection to one another. The CDC now urging all Americans to avoid travel. It's exactly what experts worried about. Since early tests showed the South African variant may chip away at the effectiveness of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines.
We'll already be on the road to being able to give people a boost that directs against the South African isolate. That's what we're doing.
In swine, in pigs now, that have characteristics of the 2009 H1N1, of the original 1918, which many of our flu viruses have remnants of that in it, as well as segments from other hosts like swine. When they all mix up together and they contain some of the elements that might make them susceptible to being transmitted to humans.
Next, you talk about a global alert system, infectious disease first responders, and germ games. Walk us through what some of that looks like and whether you think international organizations and the Biden administration can do more on that now.
And so it's quite a bargain, even if you only look at what it can do to help during a pandemic. But those investments can also help us improve health on a much broader basis. So the mRNA vaccine can be used for TB and HIV.
Virus outbreak. Scientists say drugs used to treat other viruses like HIV and the flu may be adaptable to treat coronavirus.
This scenario. So coronavirus, it's actually a family of viruses, gets inside the human cells and uses the human's machinery to divide. We have molecules that block its ability to do that. Those are drugs that were developed originally for HIV and for the flu. And so while there are clinical trials ongoing now in China, there are anecdotes of them being used and people getting better and the virus is clearing very quickly. In fact, they were used and developed for SARS or MERS also. So there's pretty good data that they'll benefit people with this.
So, David, if a treatment is...
we're very excited about that. And we've been funding mRNA for over 10 years, and now it's, accelerated its development. And getting those early warning systems in, that'll improve health all over the world. So this time, I think people will pay attention.
Your letter also goes really through a whole bunch of influences, from the movie Contagion to...
contact tracing was incredibly beneficial in places like South Korea. And, we'd have hundreds of thousands of people alive today in the U.S. if we had done that. The data, you don't actually have to give up your personal data. That's not a fair way of describing it.
This one from the federal government for a data sharing agreement before the receipt of any vaccines.
They want the name, they want the address, they want the date of birth, they want the ethnicity, they want the race, they want the sex, and then they want the ID number.
The governor says the ID numbers refer to passport, driver's license, and social security numbers. He also adds the agreement states the information would be used by the CDC, HHS, and other federal partners. It's why he's asking federal authorities for clarification on why in a public health crisis this disclosure would even be necessary.
Sadly, because of our mistakes in diagnostics, our numbers got so large that even the states that made an effort, the benefits of the contact tracing wasn't gigantic. So it's really as you get down in, lower infection rates, like 3-4%, then the contact tracing helps drive that down even lower. Yeah, so both myself and Dr. Fauci have featured in conspiracy theories. Like one says that Dr. Fauci's trying to make money off of these vaccines and various negative things about me. You're encouraging people not to trust the advice on masks or taking the vaccine, and that could be damaging. It's a new phenomena. I don't know, will it hurt the vaccine uptake where everyone who takes the vaccine is not just protecting themselves, but reducing their transmission to other people and allowing society to get back to normal. So it's a completely unexpected phenomena. And, sadly, a lot of it's based on false information. Almost every infectious disease event of the last 100 years, the U.S. Played a very strong role. Looking at the science, being willing to deliver the bad news that the next few months are going to continue to be tough. And, I feel great that we're correcting some of the mistakes that were made. These variants that are a bit scary because they are more transmissive, and we'll get data soon on whether the vaccines are slightly less effective or not. No country alone could possibly deal with this.
See, I think we got one.
They want to die. They're telling us they want to die, but their families don't want to let them go because they can't be here to understand what they're going through.
中隔离点1期工程，已经有606套隔离人员的居室和配套设施陆续交付了。而明天，也就是20号，将会再交付1173套。
今天下午又从这个全国各地调集来了60多号工人。那么
除了这个医用外科口罩啊，还有民用防护服之外呢，还有这个医用专。另外，我还了解到他们在不断的创新工艺。
You can't blame China for coronavirus. China is a victim, not a source.
Here of a severe flu-like illness, which experts say is a worldwide threat to health.
The pneumonia-type bug first appeared in Guangdong province. Officials there saying the outbreak is under control.
The World Health Organization has issued a global alert.
The virus behind a severe outbreak of pneumonia.
Alexa, when did the coronavirus start?
According to the World Health Organization, the exact cause of the current outbreak of COVID-19 is still under investigation. On December 31st, 2019, it was reported to the WHO country office in China that a new coronavirus strain, later named COVID-19, was identified by Chinese researchers in connection with a pneumonia-like illness based in Wuhan City, China.
Alexa, what is Event 201?
In October 2019, an exercise known as Event 201 simulated a high-level response to a global pandemic by government, health, and business leadership. Hosted by the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security in partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and World Economic Forum, the exercise identified impacts modeled in the simulation, such as death toll. According to the Center for Health Security, no prediction was made during the exercise, and the results of the scenario cannot be used as projections for the COVID-19 outbreak.
Even as infections surged in New Jersey, 10 people were arrested at an engagement party, charged with violating the ban on social gatherings. The guests included a 99-year-old man. In Louisiana, the pastor of the Life Tabernacle Church faces 6 misdemeanor charges for repeatedly violating stay-at-home orders.
Y'all need to shut that church down!
When mornings aren't working, law enforcement is cracking down. Like in Dallas, where marshals are breaking up crowds like these in city parks. But violations continue across the country, frustrating health officials.
That's just absolutely just unacceptable. This is so incredibly important that people stay home.
Still, evangelist Jonathan Shuttlesworth tweeted plans for an Easter gathering the size of Woodstock.
We're going to hold an outdoor Easter blowout service, not online.
And a 31-year-old writer admitted to the New York Post he hosted 20 guests for a coronavirus potluck. With infections skyrocketing in New York, the governor is telling police to get more aggressive, breaking up crowds.
How reckless and irresponsible and selfish for people not to do it on their own. I mean, what else do you have to know?
On San Diego beaches, police are handing out citations and $1,000 fines. Misery loves company, but all this togetherness is provoking public outrage and forceful calls from both health officials and law enforcement to just stay home.
The study finds that just like humans, cats can also transmit the virus through respiratory droplets and saliva, which is especially concerning where there are lots of cats in one place, like a veterinarian.
Researchers around the world say the evidence is clear. The coronavirus is likely airborne. When we cough or sneeze, larger airborne droplets containing virus can travel, usually up to about 6 feet. But smaller particles can be emitted simply by talking or singing and can go much farther and linger in the air for hours. Dr. Don Milton co-wrote the letter signed by nearly 240 scientists from around the world.
How certain are you that aerosols are playing a significant role in the transmission of COVID-19 past, say, 6 to 8 feet?
You look at the restaurant outbreak in Guangzhou, several bus outbreaks in China, and it's clear that one person could infect people over much more than 6 feet.
In some circumstances, those aerosols can travel more than 30 feet. Each layer of protection helps, like this cloth mask that partially blocks an aerosol from a simulated cough.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago.
A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care. Many died. At first, the spread was limited to those with close contacts, healthcare personnel, co-workers, and families. But now it's spreading rapidly throughout local communities. International travel has turned local epidemics into a pandemic spanning the globe. Just 3 months ago, CAPS started in South America, but has now reached several countries with more than 30,000 cases and nearly 2,000 deaths.
By Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, the World Economic Forum, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Involved in the IHR Emergency Committee for Ebola. The nature of pandemics is that many countries will be affected at the same time. This is particularly true with the respiratory pathogen, as they are often transmitted by asymptomatic persons. WHO's priorities are to establish a minimum capacity to detect and respond in each country around the world, to develop global strategies for the containment.
It was here in Wuhan a year ago China first reported cases of pneumonia from an unknown cause. And in January, it was the first place to go into a strict and sweeping lockdown. But was it where it all began? The World Health Organization is sending investigators to China to find out.
Our understanding at this time is that China is welcoming the international team and their visit, and that this is anticipated, as far as we are aware, to happen in early January.
Most experts believe the virus originated in animals and spread through this wet market in Wuhan. But China has strongly opposed calls for an international inquiry into how the pandemic began, saying it felt unfairly targeted. Chinese state media have suggested COVID-19 existed abroad, long before it was discovered in Wuhan. The search for the source of COVID-19 has fueled political tensions. US President Donald Trump accused China of a cover-up. Australia called for an investigation into the virus's origins, which soured trade relations with China. But the World Health Organization says its trip is not to apportion blame, but gather data to prevent future outbreaks. Wuhan residents are welcoming the scrutiny.
We all know that it is a seafood market where it was first discovered. But it is highly possible that it came from elsewhere and then ended up at the market. Seafood doesn't come from Wuhan, you know. Perhaps there are even some deeper origins prior to Wuhan that need to be looked into.
For the 11 million people in Wuhan, life is largely back to normal. They haven't had a locally transmitted case since May. But for most of the rest of the world, life is anything but normal. Millions are suffering, locked down, and wondering how this all began, and more importantly, when it will
global strategies for the containment and control of individual disease threats. We have completed external evaluations of surveillance and response systems in over 100 countries and carried out more than 50 simulation exercises at country level, looking for vulnerabilities and weaknesses in national systems. This voluntary, collaborative, multi-sectoral process helps countries to assess their capacities and identifies the most critical gaps within their health systems in order to prioritise opportunities for enhanced preparedness and response.
CAPS is a novel coronavirus related to those viruses that caused the frightening SARS epidemic in 2003 and the deadly MERS outbreaks in recent years. Scientists think each infected person in turn infects on average 2 more people. This disease is proving more transmissible than SARS or MERS and about as contagious as influenza. Essentially, the cumulative number of cases is doubling every week. At this rate, we can expect to see 16 times as many cases in a month unless we find a way to interrupt transmission. The virus appears to be spreading rapidly in densely populated and impoverished neighborhoods in some megacities in South America. CAPS is a serious respiratory disease. More than half of the recognized cases have required hospital care, creating a huge strain on healthcare systems. The fatality rate is about 10%. For comparison, CAPS is about as lethal as SARS and 2 to 4 times more lethal than the 1918 influenza pandemic. The worst.
You're looking at video of Sandra Lindsay, an intensive care nurse receiving the first vaccination at Long Island Jewish Medical Center in New York.
The U.S. began vaccinating the population against the coronavirus in December of 2020. The goal is to get the COVID vaccine to every person in the U.S. who wants one. But survey data shows that nearly 40% of the U.S. population doesn't want it. Widespread mistrust might have something to do with the fact that if anything goes wrong with the vaccine, the drug makers that produce them aren't responsible. Frontrunners Pfizer and Moderna built their COVID vaccines with a new kind of technology that's never before been licensed in the US. Typically, a vaccine puts a weakened or inactivated virus into our bodies to trigger an immune response. But the coronavirus vaccine relies on messenger RNA, which contains a piece of genetic code with instructions for our body. The mRNA tells our cells to make a protein, the same protein that's a spike on top of the actual coronavirus. This is what triggers the immune response to COVID-19, which then produces antibodies. Those antibodies are what ultimately protect us from getting infected if we ever encounter the real thing. Both companies have said that taking their vaccines could result in side effects similar to mild COVID symptoms like muscle pain, chills, and a headache. Even though side effects of the vaccine resemble COVID-19 symptoms, it's impossible to contract the coronavirus from the vaccine because the mRNA vaccines that Pfizer and Moderna are making don't use the live virus. Other trial participants from both the Pfizer and Moderna studies have reported similar issues after the second shot. One Pfizer trial participant told CNBC that after the booster shot, he woke up with chills, shaking so hard he cracked a tooth. For him, it hurt to even just lay in his bedsheet. But this kind of reaction isn't the norm. Both of these vaccines are about 95% effective, but it's still unclear how long this protection lasts. But the COVID vaccine's faster manufacturing timeline is part of what has been fueling widespread fear that it's unsafe to get the shot. Experts, however, say the process was no less rigorous than usual. The FDA may have cleared the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine for emergency use, but mass adoption, it's not guaranteed. Roughly 4 in 10 Americans say they would definitely or probably not get a vaccine. While this is lower than it was 2 months ago, to achieve herd immunity, experts say that about 70% of the population needs to be vaccinated or have natural antibodies. The Department of Health and Human Services is slated to spend $250 million in taxpayer money on this effort. But this push by the federal government to educate the public has been plagued by controversy, for everything from allegedly trying to politicize the message to concern over the lengthy delay in rolling out the targeted messaging that was promised. At least if you suffer severe side effects after getting the COVID vaccine, there's basically no one to blame in a U.S. court of law. Take the vaccine makers. Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar invoked the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act in February of 2020, which protects the makers of COVID products such as vaccines and treatments from legal action. That means for the next 4 years, companies like Pfizer and Moderna can't be sued for money damages in court over injuries related to the administration or use of products to treat or protect against COVID-19. But drug makers, like Pfizer, continue to reassure the public no shortcuts were taken.
This is a vaccine that is getting approved by all authorities in the world, so that should say something to them.
Pfizer and Moderna did not return CNBC's request for comment on their legal protections. But remember, it was the FDA that actually cleared the vaccine for use. So does the federal government bear any responsibility?
You can't sue the FDA for approving or disapproving a drug. That's part of its sovereign immunity.
Sovereign immunity traces back to British law before the American Revolution. You couldn't sue the king. The US adopted that same principle. There are limited exceptions, but legal experts say they don't provide a viable legal path to hold the government responsible for a COVID vaccine injury. And the workplace now introduces a unique set of legal challenges related to the vaccine. Once the FDA upgrades its emergency authorization to a full approval in a few months from now, there's speculation that employers could require staff to get inoculated.
The clients of mine that are most interested in making a mandatory vaccine a condition of employment are brick and mortar operations that have a lot of foot traffic from their customers. They view it as a selling point. Look, you can come into our business location and it's safe because all employees have been vaccinated. That's particularly important for restaurants, bars, gyms, and salons.
While this is in part a PR tactic, it is also legally within an employer's rights to roll out this kind of requirement.
Requiring a vaccine is a health and safety work rule, And employers can do that.
Now, some employees could apply to be exempt from a blanket requirement. If a workforce is unionized, the collective bargaining agreement may require negotiating with the union before mandating a vaccine. Anti-discrimination laws also provide some protections. But legal experts say that if an employee is forced to get a vaccine and suffers a debilitating injury from it, claims would be routed through workers' compensation programs and treated as an on-the-job injury.
So if you're looking for accountability, you're probably going to have to use other accountability tools beside the court. If you're looking for compensation, you should use a government compensation program.
The National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, better known by the name Vaccine Court, is relatively easy to use and generous in terms of what it's willing to pay out to those who are eligible. But because the COVID vaccine has not yet been recommended for routine administration to pregnant women or children, it doesn't qualify. Another program, and the only real pool of cash available to those harmed by the COVID vaccine, is a fund attached to the PrEP Act. The so-called Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program has been around for a decade, but experts specializing in vaccine law say it's a lot more difficult to navigate.
The problem with the PrEP Act is that it's attached to a government compensation program that's very hard to use, where the bar for compensation is very high.
Since the program began 10 years ago, the CICP has only compensated 29 claims, totaling more than $6 million. If a case for compensation through the CICP is successful, however, the program provides up to $50,000 per year for unreimbursed lost wages and any out-of-pocket medical expenses. It won't cover legal fees, nor anything to compensate for pain and/or suffering. It's also capped at the death benefit of $370,376, which is the most that a surviving family member receives in the event that a COVID vaccine proves to be fatal. There's also a strict one-year statute, meaning that all claims have to be filed within 12 months of getting the vaccine.
People who are harmed by a COVID-19 vaccine deserve to be compensated fast and generously. The PrEP Act doesn't do that.
The HRSA declined CNBC's request for an interview. Rice says the best fix is to change the rulebook of the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program.
An easy solution is to say anyone harmed by a COVID-19 vaccine is compensated under that program, but that will require legislative change.
Should that legislative change happen, lawyers tell CNBC that there usually is a retroactive provision once a new vaccine is added to the VICP. That would be good news for those injured by the COVID vaccine, who would then have access to a much larger pool of cash that has a better track record for rewarding compensation. But for now, it remains to be seen whether Congress will actually make the change, meaning that compensation options are limited.
The tents are up and the fencing is in place for San Francisco's first mass vaccination drive-through site. Tomorrow, the city plans to vaccinate 500 people, appointment only. But if the city wants to reach its goal of vaccinating 10,000 people a day, it's going to need a lot more sites like this and a larger supply of vaccines.
Dr. Andrea Tenner with San Francisco's COVID Command Center says, a spokesperson for UCSF Health says, our vaccine supply, as is the case for other healthcare institutions, has been unpredictable, which has hampered it from being distributed to even more people. So is San Francisco's goal of vaccinating 10,000 people a day realistic?
It's a huge number. This is unprecedented in history.
San Francisco is moving forward with 3 mass vaccination sites, one at the City College campus, another at the Moscone Center downtown, and the third at the San Francisco Wholesale Produce Market in the Bayview. As President Biden rolls out his national COVID-19 strategy, Dr. Tenner is hopeful the city will meet its vaccine goals.
A family has gone on a 2,500-mile cross-country trek in an RV to get a COVID-19 vaccine.
And now to a frustrating day in Torrance for people who showed up to get the COVID-19 vaccine, only to be turned away.
Well, the healthcare company Curative was supposed to administer the shots at El Camino College. People who signed up for a spot were in line when they were told the site wasn't staffed.
But there was a man in line that came all the way from Arcadia with a 90-year-old mother, and he had to wake her up at 5 o'clock in the morning. He was irate.
It worked very well. It was very, very well organized. Everyone was very kind and caring, yeah.
Well, congratulations and happy Saturday to you.
Thank you. It couldn't be better.
Barbara Eaton is probably smiling under that mask. As of about 3 o'clock today, she joined the ranks of Marin's vaccinated, that is, with at least one dose, and that would be precisely 4.9% of the population, according to the county's newly launched vaccination dashboard.
Air Breed says that they'll eventually be capable of doling out 10,000 doses a day. More than 210,000 city residents are currently eligible owing to their age or occupation, but so far, there's only enough vaccine to cover a quarter of them. The city has now launched a webpage for people to sign up for notifications once they are eligible.
Backed up for blocks. Dallas residents waiting for weeks to get the COVID-19 vaccine had to wait hours longer on Saturday.
About 2.5 hours.
Sally Jackson was among the hundreds crawling along.
It's been okay.
Car length by car length.
As long as I get my vaccine. I mean, what can we say?
Sandra Morales says she waited more than 4 hours.
It's been hard. It's a long wait.
The wait comes as a surprise for Morales, who took her mother to the distribution center in Fair Park just 2 weeks ago.
The Fair Park, it's a little bit more organized, faster service. Right now, I mean, it's a little bit nightmare.
On top of the slow roll, there were disrespectful drivers.
A lot of people are cutting in line, though they're not waiting in line.
And confusion about where the lines even started.
They're wondering why there's not more police presence trying to direct traffic.
The city of Dallas says the delays were due to increased demand for weekend appointments. People arriving earlier than scheduled, and some showed up without an appointment at all and had to be turned away. See the check mark on the top corner of the windshield? Those cars were allowed through. The cars marked with the circle and the line through it sent back home. A city spokesperson says there won't be an official tally of vaccinations administered until Sunday morning, but the plan was to get through 2,300 of them by the end of the day. That's a lot of cars and a long wait.
It is what it is. It's worth it.
With a second dose on the schedule, they'll likely have to do all of this again.
How much further do we have to go?
Today at Dodger Stadium, anti-vaccine protesters managed to shut down operations for about an hour. They blocked the entrance, walked up to cars, and tried to hand out flyers. A lot of shouting, but no violence. Still a frustrating situation for all the people in line who had already waited hours. In response, Governor Newsom tweeted out, California is working around the clock to provide life-saving vaccines to those on the front lines of this pandemic. We will not be deterred or threatened. Dodger Stadium is back up and running. The protest comes as efforts to recall the governor gain momentum, with more than 1.2 million signatures collected.
So I think the major source of it is this almost year-long shutdown of the state, of the nation. And I think a lot of people see that as an infringement on their liberties and their freedoms, and I think this is also partisan. That is, these kinds of concerns are much more likely to be heard from conservatives and Republicans.
And now we've learned law enforcement is investigating escalating threats of death and violence against the governor and his family and the businesses he founded. They include a threat to burn down one of the wineries owned by Plump Jack Group, which Newsom founded. In a statement, a spokesman for Newsom's Office of Emergency Services said any threats against elected officials, including public or private property, are taken seriously and closely monitored by the appropriate local, state, or federal enforcement.
Anti-mask protesters temporarily forced the closure of the Dodger vaccination site. The protesters blocked the entrance to Dodger Stadium, delaying people who were trying to get their shots. The action leading to a long backup of cars. In all, about 30 people, some waving signs with anti-mask messages, joined in on the demonstration. The LAPD was able to move the protesters out of the way. Cars are once again moving. No one was arrested.
COVID-19 has contaminated a batch of ice cream in China. The virus was detected in 3 samples produced by a local food company this week. Initial investigations show raw materials, including milk powder, imported from New Zealand, were used in the product.
But the whole point was to have 14 days of a downward trend before you opened up. Why would you do that? The reason was that you could have a low enough sort of a number of cases in your state that you could start to get control. you could start to test enough, you could start to contact trace enough, and you could start to put out the flames of this viral fire going on in your state.
Today on Twitter, you wrote that the truth about this virus is being kept from the world by the CDC, by the World Health Organization, to allow friends of the current administration to benefit from it, both financially and physically.
There are therapies we know are effective right now, like forsythia, and they don't even appear on the CDC website.
On your blog, you also wrote that the World Health Organization is somehow in bed with pharmaceutical companies.
Because they are. That's who stands to gain from this. They're working hand in glove. And the hand is reaching into our pockets.
The CDC is exploring forsythia and other homeopathic treatments, but right now, there's no science to back any of these claims.
Oh, no way Dr. Cheever or the people who put him into power can profit from it.
We're not ruling anything out. There are people who are sick, people who are dying, and we...
They're not keeping us safe from this any more than they kept us safe
about the
from Wall
health of every
Street
American
or Katrina.
Yes.
That's funny.
What's funny?
No, I think you're funny, because if you check on Facebook, you'll find a communique attributed to Dr. Cheever by Elizabeth Nygaard about the quarantine of Chicago, hours before it was announced to the public. That's why I think he's a bit disingenuous when he says equal care for all, and not just his friends.
Some pretty wild allegations here, Dr. Cheever. I mean, can you tell us what communication appeared and when? What exactly is the nature of your relationship with Elizabeth Nygaard?
Well, again, I'm not aware of anything attributed to me on any social
I'm sure you're not. It is there.
None of the states, including California, abided by that. There's also, I think, this tension between what is the policy versus what are the people doing. So even if the message has been for the last several months, as you guys have been talking about all morning, that you should wear masks, it only matters if people actually end up doing it or not. And even in California, there were many times where you saw these clusters of people getting together, not physically distancing, and not wearing masks, despite what Governor Newsom was saying there, for example. So large state, open too early, mask policy sort of unevenly distributed across the country, and you're seeing the consequences of it. These numbers are going to go up. Right now, you have people coming out saying, I'm definitely not going to shut down again. I'm definitely not going to mandate masks again. I don't think they're going to have the ability to make those decisions after a while, because if the hospitals become overwhelmed, and that is a real possibility. We saw that in Italy, where you saw hospitals where people could not get in, despite the fact that they were very, very sick, needed to be hospitalized, and likely ended up dying at home. If that sort of thing starts happening, I think the policies are going to become very, very obvious in terms of what needs to be done. People are going to have to stay home. Masks are going to have to be worn in essential situations. And that's it. That's the only way we can start to get some semblance of control again.
Sanjay, in terms of what we've learned about how this virus is spread or best spread, I don't know if you caught last hour when I was on my soapbox blabbering about how it was from human beings.
That could be any hour.
Yeah,
the
but I mean,
soapbox
really,
could be
you can tune in at any time and see that. But
I think human beings are the primary spreaders. I mean, I think surfaces are still a concern. I mean, I think in a situation like this, you have to try and do the best you can to mitigate all potential exposures. I mean, we are in a really tough spot here. So I don't think we're in a. I mean, you could start to say, hey, look, I'm not going to worry about that anymore. That's fine. That's great. I think right now we need to be worrying about everything. These numbers are going up. I mean, I don't want to panic people in that sense, but this is troublesome, what's happening here in the country right now. There is still a path forward. We have to realize that, but at some point we're not going to have a very clear path forward anymore, and the virus is just going to spread to a point where we can't control it.
We're learning more tonight about the mysterious death of a man who died just hours after getting the COVID-19 vaccine. Multiple agencies are now investigating what caused his death.
Yeah, a lot to learn about this one, Steve. First, the county posting on social media that a person was diagnosed with COVID-19 back in December and then died just hours after getting the vaccine on Thursday. This news now causing concern in this community, now questioning the safety of the COVID-19 vaccine. An Auburn woman tonight says she witnessed tragedy firsthand. In a post on Facebook, she says she saw her grandfather's aide, a 60-year-old man, get the COVID vaccine at a senior living facility Thursday. She writes 20 minutes later, he realized his legs felt tingly and he was having shortness of breath. He was wheeled out in an ambulance. 1 hour later, he was in ICU on a ventilator, and 3 hours later, he passed away. She goes on to say, hearing this broke my family's heart, as he has taken care of my grandpa for years and was there helping as we were coming to say our goodbyes.
There have not been any deaths associated with vaccination.
Dr. Jeffrey Klausner, an infectious disease expert at UCLA, says people shouldn't be so quick to place blame before there are answers on a cause of death. He says timing is everything.
People will die every day in the United States from natural causes or other types of events. And, we have to be very careful that we don't associate the fact that someone got a vaccine with that death or with that particular event.
Meanwhile, the county coroner conducting an autopsy to determine the cause of death, not confirming the age, gender, where this happened, or what vaccine they received. Dr. Klausner says there have been a few allergic reactions to the vaccine, including trouble breathing and fainting, which happened within 15 minutes of the dose being given. But he says the risk is low, about 1 in every 250,000 shots.
The COVID-19 and the coronavirus is much more dangerous than the vaccine.
Famed TV doctor Drew Pinsky still isn't over COVID-19, just the opposite.
I am technically a long hauler now.
He's part of a growing number of COVID long haulers wrestling with debilitating and often strange symptoms weeks, even months after the infection.
I'm irritable, I'm moody, I have ringing in my ears, I have fogginess, I have trouble concentrating. If people give me a series of sequence of commands, I can't even hear them really. And then on top of that, I'm intermittently short of breath.
Even as we talked, he was still coughing.
Drew, first of all,
fatigue is another big issue.
If I could just go back to a normal level of activity, this would not be so disabling. But as it is, I just am forced to lie down after every hour or two.
When you talk about brain fog, are you having trouble just focusing minute to minute, or is it in spurts?
It is as though my brain fatigues and I'm just sort of unable to go further. Then I have trouble sort of concentrating. Literally, colors kind of get dull. I feel a fullness in my head. It's a very, very strange feeling.
The world is on the brink of a catastrophic moral failure. Most manufacturers have prioritized regulatory approval in rich countries where the profits are highest, rather than submitting full dossiers to WHO.
The WHO-backed COVAX program, which aims to share vaccines with all countries based on need, has so far secured 2 billion doses. It's due to begin rollout in February, but there are concerns that it may be delayed.
Well, the Pennsylvania Department of Health is reporting 6,839 new coronavirus cases over the last 2 days. The statewide case total sitting at 846,078. 3,370 people are hospitalized today, 695 of them in intensive care. The statewide death toll is up to 21,687, with 85 new deaths being reported this noon.
We are also ready to distribute the vaccines.
Chicago area hospitals are preparing to receive doses of the vaccine, with Loyola University Medical Center and Christ Medical Center as 2 of the state's 10 regional distribution points. Initially, the state of Illinois will receive a total of 109,000 doses. 23,000 of those will go to the city of Chicago. The other 86,000 will go to the rest of the state.
We spent literally months building up the infrastructure, working with our hospitals, building out cold storage, a capacity.
Today, during a national television appearance on MSNBC, Mayor Lori Lightfoot discussed the equitable distribution of the vaccine.
Make sure you capture the demographic information on who's actually getting the vaccine. If you do that, you can ensure that there's actual equity.
She says the city faces 2 major challenges in the vaccination effort: distribution and distrust.
We've got to communicate effectively to them about the virus and why it's important, but also why it's effective. And the best way to do that is with trusted community leaders.
We're going to listen to exactly what the community is saying and try to get them to the answers.
The Reverend Robin Hood says faith leaders will play a major role in combating community skepticism.
We are not the ones that are going to say, take the vaccine. We are the ones to say, let's get all the information that we can gather and make an educated decision about this.
In Auburn Gresham on the city's south side, he helped organize a drive-through and walk-up testing event. Leaders there say testing and masks remain essential.
The notion that the vaccine is here, that's great. But until it hit us, until it goes into our arm, until we're convinced that it works, let's do what we can do, wear a mask.
This is the Moderna vaccine that you're getting today?
The line to get a vaccine in Plano snaked around John Clark Stadium. Thousands of people showed up hoping to get the shot, only to be turned away.
We had folks that then moved on out of the line, and we kept it going.
Officials say you can't just show up. You need to sign up for a slot.
You can't come here without an appointment and get a vaccine. We have a certain number of doses, and we have appointments for those.
This video was provided to WFAA by the county. Our cameras were not allowed inside. Officials tell us about 800 people at this hub in Plano and 800 people at a hub in McKinney were vaccinated. But the process is slow, and there is a long waiting list.
So we have a county of 1 million people, about 180,000 who've signed up to get the vaccine.
They're known carriers of multiple coronaviruses. Bats don't mount an immune response like an infected human would. Instead, like a living chemistry set, they allow an eclectic mix of viruses to brew in their bodies and combine. The result? A novel coronavirus is born. The genetic sequence of SARS-CoV-2 in humans is 96% identical to the bat coronavirus. How it invaded our population is still unknown, but there are factors that bring bats closer to humans, likely through an intermediary animal, just like in the case of the first SARS outbreak.
There was an intermediate host between bats and humans. We know that was the civet cat in that case. We think there was another intermediate in this case, but it's that recombination that changes the virus and makes it more lethal.
But Dr. Meehan says don't place all the blame on the bat.
The issue is not any particular animal, whether it's bats or chickens or pigs or whatever, the civet cat in the case of SARS. It's those interactions and the destruction of habitat, the impact on animals, the use of wildlife as food. Those are all things that really up the ante in terms of the likelihood of this sort of event happening.